Hi, my name is Erin, as you all know, and I read V for Vendetta. V for Vendetta was created by Alan Moore and David Lloyd, but was written by just Alan Moore. The rest of the creative team involves names I am going to read off of my screen because they are hard to pronounce, some of them. Steve Whitaker and Shobin Dodds were the two other colorists in addition to David Lloyd. And then the letterers were Jenny O'Connor, Steve Craddock, and Alida Fell. It was published by DC Comics and later published by Vertigo, which is actually an imprint of DC Comics. It is not, in my opinion, a graphic novel. If you look anywhere on the internet, everyone will tell you it is a graphic novel, but I disagree based on what we've learned. It's actually a set of 10 volumes. They even have the original volume covers in here, like this. And it's also published in a set of 3 books, which I will get to when I talk about the act structure. I looked up the page count because this one has a lot of these extra pages in it in between like the volumes. It has the original volume covers and whatever. So I looked up the page count of like just any typical paperback copy of V for Vendetta, and it's generally 288 pages. But my copy is 357 pages of just story, not even the extra like epilogue or introduction stuff. I will say, like a little side note, it was a little bit difficult, more difficult than I anticipated doing this project because I feel like there's just multiple answers to these questions and it's really just left up to interpretation. So when we start getting into the act breaks, I guess I'll start there with the act breaks. V for Vendetta was originally published, well, in here it says that it was published in 3 books. So book 1 is volumes 1 through 3, book 2 is volumes 4 through 7, and book 3 is volumes 8 through 10. And I'm inclined to believe that those are the act breaks that Alan Moore was originally intending. I mean, otherwise, why would you sell it in books like that instead of just making it one big graphic novel, which also leads me to believe that it's not an actual graphic novel if they, sold it in books. So, whatever. Anyway, so yeah, and I looked in here what those act breaks, or book breaks, if you will, would be. And I guess they kind of felt like act breaks, but I think where I'm stumbling here is that it doesn't necessarily follow our structure that we learned in class. So the 5 pages, 12 pages, 5 pages. Now I looked up I did the math on those percentages, and it'd be roughly 22% for Act 1 and Act 3, so 22% for each. And so I looked up the numbers and I did the math, and that would put us at about page 81 in this version. And I guess, depending on whose story you think it is, that could be a good act break. But it all just depends, like I said, on interpretation. So I'm going to go straight to the protagonist part and then just get back to the act break part. So, for the protagonist, I look at V for Vendetta a lot like The Last of Us, in the sense that it really could have more than one protagonist, depending on whose story you really want to look at. So I'm just going to give arguments for both. First, the story is called V for Vendetta, so I like to think that they titled it off of their title character for a reason. And a lot of it is V's revenge or vengeance story, you know? V was an experiment, and he wants revenge on these people that experimented on him, but at the same time he also wants equality for everybody, and he wants to tear down this tyrannical world that has been created and leave ashes for a new world to be born. So that's ultimately his goal, and he does achieve that goal, and he's very active in the process. He murders a bunch of people, he blows up a lot of buildings, he plans, he's strategic, he hides out in his, like, cool house space that he made for himself. And so he definitely has a lot going on. He's very active. My only issue with V as the protagonist is that there's not really a lot of conflict in his way. He doesn't feel remorse about anything. He is very smart, he's very talented, he's a good fighter. So not a lot stands in his way, and the one time someone stood in his way with the gun in his face, the person kind of had karma come back on them, and they hadn't loaded the gun, so when they fired it, nothing happened, and the guy died. So V doesn't have a lot of conflict at all. I think really his main conflict is that Evie's hanging around, and she doesn't really want to kill anyone, and honestly, this is kind of what I was like reading the conversations between him and Evie, because she didn't really do anything. See, Evie had a pretty troubled past. At the beginning of the story, she's 16, she is an orphan, and she's becoming a prostitute for money because her job does not really pay her anything. V rescues her from almost getting raped and brings her to the Shadow Gallery, his underground bunker, hideout, lair, whatever you wish to call it. And then she just kind of stays with him for a while. She doesn't really do anything until, she helps him on one of his conquests, but then she finds out that he kills people and she doesn't really want to be part of it, even though she thinks that his idea is good, and believes in the cause. And then she questions him one day why he doesn't love her and if he is her dad, and he dumps her out on the street. And they actually don't reconnect until she tries to kill somebody and he kidnaps her and pretends that she has been arrested for treason. And he does it all for her benefit. He says that it's to help her become more like him, to not have fear, to not be held back, and to be able to pursue the goal without any restrictions. And because of it, she does become a much better character. But she still takes that freedom a much different direction from V. But in the end of the story, when V is killed, and he is dead, and he passes everything along to Evie, he actually takes her through the Shadow Gallery and says, "This is all yours, I'm leaving this to you." And she finally gets it. At the end of the novel, she gets it, that V is an idea, and she argues with herself whether or not she should take off the mask and look at who he really is. And she envisions herself taking off the mask multiple times and seeing different people, seeing Gordon, seeing her dead father, seeing all these people that have died for this cause. And finally, she takes off the mask and she sees herself. And that's when it clicks, and that's when she knows that what she has to do is put on the mask and become V now, and not let anyone know the man that she loved had died, but now she is him, and she finds a new pupil, and she says, "Hi, welcome to the Shadow Gallery, I am V, and this is what I'm doing with my life, is helping to rebuild a good world." Definitely they have strong arcs, or at least Evie does. I wouldn't really argue that V has much of a character arc. He kind of just exists and does cool things and then dies. But Evie, she grows into a very strong woman by the end of it, and she's driven, and she's got a path, and she knows what she wants to do with her life, whereas contrasted with the beginning, where she was just kind of floating around and doing whatever to get by. I would say the other character in the story that has a really strong arc is Finch. He is an investigator who is investigating V, and the terrorist acts and the case and everything, and he doesn't necessarily agree with what the leader or the government are doing, but he still does his job well. He abides by the law, even though he's blunt about his feelings, and then come the end of the story, he really wants to get into V's head and understand why V does the things that he does. So he takes some LSD and gets really high, and suddenly he understands. And so he finds V, and he is who ends up killing V in the end. But he doesn't give away where the Shadow Gallery is or any of the whereabouts. He just kind of absorbs it and says, I'm going to let this happen. So definitely has a really strong arc, contrasted to where he was in the beginning of the story. Now, one thing about V for Vendetta is that they wanted Alan Moore and David Lloyd, they wanted it to have more of a cinematic feel. So they didn't do any thought bubbles or any sound effects or anything like that. They simply just did captions and dialogue captions, and then dialogue bubbles, and anything that came from like a radio, bursts, any of that kind of stuff, but that's it. That and the art. They wanted it to be, like I said, more cinematic. And I think it almost made it more interesting to read for me because once I knew, because I was so sucked into the visuals and purely just what they were saying, and I wasn't so focused on and not to say that, like sound effects and thought bubbles and stuff are distracting, but it did really feel like I was just watching some big event. The story of V for Vendetta is so grand, and it follows so many characters. And one thing that it definitely does very well is informing you of where you are and who you're with, and just making sure that everything makes sense and is clear. But it's still very vague and mysterious. There's a lot of, and that's more narrative, the vague and mysterious part, but the lettering was very clear and easy to understand, and the panels, there was only like 1 or 2 times I think that I had to go over and read it a couple times, or I guess look at it a couple times because it was just art, because I didn't really understand what was happening. I would definitely recommend V for Vendetta to any writer that wants a good story with dozens of interesting characters that I couldn't even get to in this video if I tried, that all have crazy motives for things. There's great dialogue, it's really interesting structure, the art is beautiful, it's totally worth reading, definitely, and analyzing too, because there's a lot to pick apart here as far as character and setting, and man, there's just so much here that writers would just love to pick apart. And even my non-writing friends, I would absolutely recommend they read it. It's a really cool story, it's fun, it makes you think a lot about the world. I said fun in the sense that I meant fun like it's a very quick read and it's a very engaging read, and for me that's fun. So definitely I recommend this to anybody that likes a really good story that has a lot of mysterious, vague, dark, gritty elements. So V for Vendetta is a must. I'm definitely glad that I got V for Vendetta for my assignment. I learned a lot about it. I'm so glad that I finally read it. And I hope that this video presentation was actually kind of helpful for some of you. Maybe it makes you want to read it, or maybe you learned a little bit more about it. I feel like it was just actually me rambling about it. So I'm sorry in advance, or I guess it's way too late now. I'm sorry that you had to sit through my ramblings about V for Vendetta, but it's really good, and I highly recommend that you read it, and then we can have a book club, and we can sit down and we can talk about it face to face. So, thanks, and have a good night.